Do you ever get the sense that your therapist is trying to fix you? In one sense, of course they are. If you went to a doctor or a physio with one complaint or another, you would expect them to help you with that issue. Surely we want our mental health professionals to do the same, but there's an important nuance here. There's a sense in which fixing is not only entirely unhelpful, it can also often be quite harmful. So let's take a look. Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Autism From The Inside. I make weekly videos exploring neurodivergence and emotional intelligence, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. Psychology suffers from a fatal flaw. The same fatal flaw as basically all of Western medicine. So that is what most of this video is about today, exploring that. But before we get into that, let me share 5 questions with you you can ask yourself to figure out if your therapist is trying to fix you. So I mentioned that you could think of fix in a positive or a negative sense. So let's start with the negative sense first. How do you know if your therapist is trying to fix you in like a forcing way that doesn't honor who you really are? Number 1, the first thing to ask yourself is, do I feel heard and understood? If not, that's a bad sign. Number 2 is, do I feel like I keep having to correct or readjust or bring us back onto the right track so that we keep going back to what I want to talk about? Number 3 is, do you find yourself explaining yourself or justifying yourself? Instead of just describing your experience, you kind of feel the need to back it up and justify it a bit more so that it feels like it makes sense. Number 4 is, do you feel pushed in a certain direction? How comfortable are you with the therapist's suggestions? Is it mostly just, yeah, fine, no problem? Or are you noticing a bit of resistance in you perhaps? A bit of uncertainty, you're not really sure, but you end up just doing it anyway. And finally, number 5, how confident are you that the practices suggested, the methods suggested, will actually help? Do you get the sense that, yeah, this is exciting, this is a really good idea, I'm in safe hands? Or are you a little bit more skeptical? You're not really sure. It doesn't really feel like a good idea, but again, you just end up going with the flow and doing it anyway. If you're answering yes to a lot of those questions, that's a pretty strong sign that you're feeling pushed to go into a direction that you're not 100% comfortable with. So instead, let's have a look at what the good version of fixing might look and feel like in terms of learning and changing and growing and healing, as opposed to forcing and pushing against resistance. You might ask yourself, do I feel safe? Does the therapist actively do things that lead me to feel safe? Does my therapist invite me, inspire me to want to change myself, to want to learn and grow? Do you and your therapist have a shared goal that you came up with together and you both agree to? Have they explained at least a little bit about the method that you're planning to use together? Have you actually agreed to that method? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you have any questions that need answering in advance before it's likely that you'll be fully on board with the process? And finally, do they encourage the paradoxical idea of acceptance of your limitations and transcendence of your limitations? Okay, maybe that last one might not have made a lot of sense, but by the end of the video, I'm sure it will. So if that's all you wanted, there you have it, 5 ways to tell if your therapist is trying to fix you. But as I mentioned earlier, the concept of fixing, the distinction between a good, healthy type of fixing and a really unhealthy, damaging type of fixing can be a little bit difficult to see. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive into unpacking that nuance. As I mentioned before, psychology, along with most of Western medicine, has a fatal flaw at the core of one of its most fundamental assumptions. For a very, very long time, the idea that drove science and research and medicine and psychology was that there is one healthy way to be human. And if we study healthy people, we'll know what that looks like. And if we study people with illnesses, either physical illnesses or mental illnesses, then we'll find the difference from that and we'll help the unhealthy people get back to being healthy and normal. And As you can probably tell, the concept of having only one way to be healthy, only one way to be normal, definitely throws up some challenges. This is not an accidental assumption. I mean, for a long time, virtually all research participants were male. And it's my understanding that that was a preference, not just an accident, because male bodies tend to be more stable and it was easier to observe the things that they were trying to measure. So, as crazy as that might sound to 21st century ears, it's actually fairly recent that people even considered that a woman's version of healthy might be different, or that women might be worth studying separately just to see, are there any differences that are worth noting? Things like that. So if it's true that we all live in unique physical bodies, it's even more true that your brain and your psyche are one of a kind. So what does this have to do with a therapist trying to fix you? Well, whether you go to a doctor or a therapist or any other kind of professional, it matters a lot what they think healthy is for you. A good example that you might be familiar with is BMI, body mass index. Can you calculate a person's healthy weight range based on nothing more than their height? Well, for a long time, the answer was yes, or at least the goal was yes. And now we're realizing that there is so much more to this and what makes a person healthy than just their height to weight ratio. Things like sex and ethnicity and genetics and a whole bunch of other factors can have a significant impact on what healthy means for you. So if you're seeing a professional and they have one idea of what healthy is, and it's very strict and it's based on the normal average, and if that's not you, then that's going to be a problem and it's going to feel like someone's trying to fix you, to turn you into the statistical average rather than honor the body and the mind that you inhabit at the moment. Inhabit at the moment. It kind of sounds like you're about to leave your body and go and inhabit someone else's mind and body. That's not exactly what I meant, but I think you get the picture. So when this comes to mental health, what does healthy look like? Within the paradigm of neurodiversity, what is a healthy brain? How can we define a healthy brain versus an unhealthy brain when all brains are different? So I don't know about you, but I've definitely had the experience of trying to convince a therapist that something that they seem to think is a problem is absolutely not a problem. So I'll give you a personal example. My brain analyzes everything all the time, whether I like it or not. Sometimes people call this overthinking, right? Overanalyzing. Maybe I should just let it go without having it churn around and around in my head all the time. Overthinking in general gets a pretty bad rap, but for me, it's actually really nice. When I analyze something and look at it from every angle and observe every detail and try and make it, fit and make sense in my head, that's my processing style. That's how I make sense of the world. You might say to someone, don't overthink it, but as if you would ever say, don't process your emotions, don't reflect on how you feel. For me, that's how I do it. I think about it a lot and I go around and round from every detail, and it's actually relaxing for me. There's a very, very big difference between overthinking and ruminating. Overthinking, for me at least, this is my personal definition, is thinking about things a lot more than most people do. And ruminating is where you're going round and round in circles in your head, spinning your wheels and not actually making any progress, and probably causing yourself a whole bunch of anxiety in the process. I can fully understand that if my therapist equates overthinking with ruminating, then they're probably going to think that it's a bad thing for me. But I'm not spinning my wheels up here. I'm exploring all of the roads that can possibly be explored. But for any psychologist who thinks there's one way to be normal or that there's one right way to process things, they are naturally going to push back on that. Now, I alluded to this earlier, but psychology and medicine and professionals in general are changing to adapt to this new way of thinking, but the system, the old habits, they are rooted in the idea that there's one right way to be human. So that is going to take quite some time to completely change the whole way we think about medicine and mental health. But this doesn't really answer the question, does it, right? The question is, what is healthy? How do we know what's healthy and what's unhealthy? And if everyone is different, that doesn't answer the question at all, doesn't get us even a little bit closer to answering the question. In fact, to make progress, I need to change, right? If I'm trying to work on an issue, then we need to do something to improve that issue or that situation. And chances are that's going to involve some kind of change on my part. So in that sense, if my therapist is not actively trying to help me to change, to support me to change, then what are we doing here in the first place? But there's a very fine line between healing and growing on the one hand and forcing and fixing on the other. And the main difference is if we are acknowledging the reality of the situation. Paradoxically, even wanting to change myself starts with accepting myself. Forcing and fixing, on the other hand, feels like rejecting the parts of myself that I don't like. Maybe I want to be the kind of person who can remember what's in the fridge even when the door is shut. And maybe I hate the fact that as soon as I close the door, as soon as it's out of my line of sight, I completely forget about it. I wish I weren't like this. But I am, though. The reality is, at this moment at least, I am like that. And ignoring that reality, ignoring that starting point, and wishing things were different usually doesn't help all that much. This is actually an explicit step in the life coaching process. Before we make any attempt to change the situation, we have to get a good understanding of where we're at right now and what we've already tried before, so we know that's not going to work. A big part of my job as a life coach is making sure that the solution and the strategy that we come up with is actually fundamentally different to what has already been tried. Very often, people come up with a new idea, and the new idea sounds a lot like the old idea in, wearing a Sunday dress or a new hat or something. So in that sense, the key is accepting all parts of yourself, all parts of reality, even the bits that you wish weren't there and that you're actively trying to change. And this is not rocket science either. When I was in primary school, I remember a page they gave us to color, and it read, "Don't try to be an apple if you're a banana, or you will always be a second-rate apple." And that's not the worst, right? If you succeed in becoming a second-rate version of a normal human being, whatever that means, then chances are you'll internalize that as an identity and carry around this feeling of I'm not very good your whole life. That's why discovering you're autistic is often such a powerful, life-changing experience. I'm not a second-rate version of normal, I'm autistic. Wow, that changes everything. Anyway, I'm making this video for you today because when I saw a therapist for the first time, I had no idea what good looked like, and I wasted a lot of money on people that I probably should have just said, this isn't quite working out, and tried to find someone else. Finding the right help can be life-changing, and even just knowing what help is out there to access if you need it makes a really big difference. One of the things I have to do in my life coaching all the time is explain the difference between coaching and therapy. I think I made a whole video on that, so I'll try and link that somewhere if I can find it. But the upshot of that is using the right tool for the right job. Most people I talk to say, yep, perfect, coaching is exactly what I need right now. It also means I can recommend therapy in conjunction to coaching so that people get the best of both worlds. Anyway, I'd better leave it there. If you're looking for the next step in your own journey, make sure you check out the online AFTI community. As I always say, the best way to learn about autism is to meet autistic people. So if you'd like to join one of our autism-friendly online hangouts, you can get a free come and see ticket from the events page on the AFTI website. So until next time, I'm really curious what your experience has been. Do you have any tips on finding a good fit as a therapist and knowing if they're trying to fix you or not? Please leave a comment if you can. I'd love to hear what you think. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.